Hello? All right. Mic check. So I'm checking my phone to make sure I've turned it to silent, and I'm asking you all to do the same. Kim told me to. No. Well, good evening, and welcome to the 4th annual Gershenson Lecture, The Future of Faith. I'm Reverend Dr. Tamla Wilson of Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, Interfaith Ministry Board Member and Chair of the Interfaith Relations and Community Partnership Committee. It is wonderful that we are once again getting to hold the lecture series in person. We are so thankful to the many religious leaders and community members joining us tonight, both in person and viewing us on our live stream via Facebook and the Religion News Service. Tonight's event exemplifies the heart of the work of Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston by bringing people of diverse faith traditions together for dialogue, collaboration, and service. Their faithful and endless work does not and has not stopped, not for hurricanes or pandemics or record-setting Texas freeze. That doesn't even sound right together, right? Texas freeze. Their work is constant and unyielding, is constant and unyielding as it is a true demonstration of our shared commitment across faith traditions to create a more respectful, connected, and caring society. As many of you have heard, one of our city's greatest religious leaders and champions of the work of Interfaith Ministries passed away yesterday at age 91. Known as one of the original Three Amigos, Archbishop Joseph Fiorenza, along with my pastor emeritus, Reverend Dr. William Lawson, and Rabbi Samuel Karff, these three men led our city through historic times. It is a beautiful coincidence that yesterday was also Rabbi Karff's birthday. I'm sure that somewhere there was a holy reunion of dear friends. Let us take a moment to pay tribute to a man who, in the words of Elliot Gershenson, was first and foremost a humble servant who had a gentle nature and embodied a level of dignity and grace that is so needed in today's world. Let our thoughts be with him in our silence and all those who loved him.
Tonight's lecture pays tribute to a dear friend of mine and a mentor of many years of mine and of many of you, I'm sure, here tonight. My name's Jody Bernstein, and I'm the Vice President of Interfaith Relations and Community Partnerships of Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston. It's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about Elliot Gershenson, who I know is watching us on Facebook or YouTube tonight, live from his home in Florida. We miss you and appreciate you, Elliot. Thank you for tuning in. Elliot retired in 2015. He had spent 11 and a half years at the helm of Interfaith Ministries. He transformed the work of the organization. He took IM to new levels. He helped launch new programs. He helped unite people in dialogue, service, and collaboration. More importantly, he helped many of us create long-lasting friendships. He helped thousands of people. He shined the light on IM's outreach and service, and he did so much more. Because of the foundation that Elliot Gershenson laid as the leader of Interfaith Ministries, and the vision and creativity of our current president and CEO, Martin Kaminsky, we continue to accomplish so much.
And now, we welcome 5 amazing faith leaders from in and around Greater Houston, here to speak to us on the future of faith. Here to share real-life stories on how our faith communities are coping with the promise and peril of a changing religious landscape. Please welcome, and if y'all will wave as I call your name, Shariq Ghani, founder and director of Minaret Foundation, my former classmate at UT, Dr. Wright, co-pastor at Fountain of Praise Church, Pastor Joseph Rios, lead pastor for the Generations community of Chapelwood United Methodist Church, Reverend Laura Mayo, senior minister at Covenant Church, an ecumenical liberal Baptist congregation, and Rabbi Scott Hausman-Weiss, spiritual leader of Congregation Shma, Koleinu. And to moderate our discussion, we welcome Mr. Bob SMIETANA, an award-winning reporter and Pulitzer grantee who has become one of the most respected and well-known religion reporters in the country. With more than 2 decades of experience covering religion, spirituality, and ethics, he is currently a national religion reporter with Religion News Service and the author of a recently released book, Reorganized Religion. Please welcome Mr. Bob SMIETANA.
Thank you. Thank you. There we go. It's a real honor to be here. I tell people I have the best job in America, which I do, because I get to talk to really smart people about God, life, the universe, and the meaning of everything all day long. And I don't have to win. It's the best thing. Because most people, when they talk about these topics, they're trying to win, right? They are trying to tell you why what they believe is awesome and reinforce that, or they're trying to tell you why what you believe is wrong. So if they ask you what you believe, when you're saying, this is what I believe, they're already in their mind going, well, here's the 15 reasons why that is wrong. But as a reporter, I'm not there to tell people what they should believe or how they believe, so I'm just there to ask questions. And I'm thrilled to be here because this is an exciting time in American religion. It's a complicated time, and the folks in this room and the communities you represent are trying to solve really complicated questions at a very difficult time, and you are kind of the voice of reason sometimes to say, who do we want to be in this moment? Because there's lots of pressures on us to be after each other and to turn on each other because we're in crisis all the time. And these folks and other folks are saying, no, here's a better way that we could be. And we all of our lives have been shaped by people who made decisions to build institutions and houses of worship and communities that benefit us. They didn't know us. And they still did these things because they wanted to benefit everyone. They didn't do it just for themselves, they did it for everyone. So I have like 7 minutes to talk about this book. So I'm not gonna really talk about the book much, except to say a couple small things. And I'll tell you a couple small stories. So when I was born in 1965. America was 85% white, mostly Christian. The men were in charge. And the big religion question of the day is which group of Christians are going to be in charge? The Protestants or the Catholics? This was the big deal back then. I'm about to have a granddaughter. We have nicknamed her Paprika because my daughter is a cook. So when Paprika is born in December, she'll be born into a world where half the kids are not white and half the kids are. She'll be born into the world where it's more egalitarian, not there yet, but getting there. She'll be born into a world where what the largest and fastest growing religious group in the country are the nuns. And the nuns are none of the above. So when you take a religion survey, they say, are you Muslim, are you Jewish, are you Christian, are you Protestant, are you Hindu? And if you say none, you're none of the above. So they become the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. So according to projections from the Pew Research Center, which just came out last week, great timing for this. They looked at the current population, they looked at birth rates, they looked at switching in and out of religion, and they looked at migration, and they projected what America could look like. And there's no projection in which the Christian population grows. It will shrink, and the nuns will grow. So what we'll probably end up with is about 45% Christian, 44 to 45% none, and about 13% of people of other faiths. So there's a couple really interesting things there. One is, when I was born in 65, the white Christians outnumbered everybody, 10 to 1, right? Now, in the next 50 years, you will probably have a more level playing field, where you'll have some white Christians, you'll have Christians of color, and you'll have the nuns, and then you'll have people of other faiths, and they're all going to be peers. So we're all going to get to figure out how to get along. So this is great, because you're trying to figure out how do we build a country where we have such diversity. So a couple other small things. If you remember anything from this talk, remember this, that everything is changing all at once, all the time. That's what's happening in America. Everything is changing. Everything. From our discussions of gender, our understanding of what it means to be America, the understanding of religion, the place of religion in society, technology. Imagine when you were a kid, if someone told you that a little box with some glass in the front would run your life, and then you could talk to anyone in the world, and you would never pick up a map again because it would tell you where to go, and you would know the innermost thoughts of every person on the planet, whatever they are, the very nice thoughts and the perhaps less kind of crazy thoughts that everyone has inside their mind, you would know them all. You would think, this is terrible. Why do I want to know these things? But that's what we have in. We have this world, and we have a world where, for organized religion, used to be a place where used to have a central role in the society, and the decision for religious groups was, people are going to be religious. So we have to tell them why our religious group is the best. Or, if you were nicer, you'd say it's the best for you. Now, we have people who think, in the story of religion, is not for us. Why should we care? And you're trying to convince people that perhaps there might be something sacred about life, and perhaps there might be something bigger than yourself. It's a complex question. And there's one other thing I want to, if you remember this too, so everything's changing all at once at the same time. So I don't know about you, but if I go to a store and one thing has changed, I'm not happy. So anybody ever been to Chick-fil-A? Chick-fil-A. I lived in Nashville for a while. We all love Chick-fil-A. So in Nashville, you go to Chick-fil-A, you can get chicken fingers or chicken tenders. They're really good. They're not the best chicken tenders, but they're really good. If you go to Chick-fil-A in Illinois, you get spicy chicken fingers. You can't get regular ones. Every time I go with my wife, she's like, I'd like chicken fingers. You can't get chicken fingers. What is wrong with America? Right? Just think about, everything is changing all the time. No wonder people are having it harried and at the ends of their ropes. And what do we do when there's a crisis? What do people do? What's the first thing they want to know? Who's to blame? And they turn on each other. So I'll tell you one other thing, and then we're going to have our conversation. So when I was 16 years old, or actually when I was 13 years old, my folks did two things that changed my life. They started taking me to church, and they enrolled me in the science fiction book club. Now, there are things in the science fiction books that the church people didn't like. But one kind of captured my heart, one fueled my imagination. So I've been a Star Trek, and I'm a nerdy person. So my favorite Star Trek episode is called Day of the Dove. And if you don't know much about Star Trek, what happens is the crew of the Enterprise, the intrepid crew, finds the Klingons, who are their enemies. A ship is abandoned. And they think, oh, we're going to help them. And of course, the Klingons are like, oh, we're going to take over this ship because they're our enemies. And they start fighting each other. Now, in the middle of this is before Star Wars, they start fighting with swords. Sword fights in space. What could be better, right? But no one says, why do we have swords in space? We have laser guns. Where'd they go? And they all start making up reasons to hate the other side. One guy says, they killed my brother. We're going to kill them all. And the other people are like, I don't think he had a brother. He's an only child. The other person is like, you killed my wife. And you're like, no, your wife is right there. And they realize, oh, this alien has manipulated them into hating each other. And they don't like each other already. And they have, they're at conflict with each other. But someone else is making them hate each other and fight for their own entertainment. So one of the Klingons throws down his sword and says, only a fool fights in a burning house. It's great. So remember that only a fool, and you don't have to, you could choose something so much better. And most of you are doing that, right? It's a really remarkable time for you to do this. But it's complicated. And if you think about this kind of COVID era, which is going to be one of the first questions we talk about, think about how we think that religious groups don't move fast. Think about all the change that people managed from you, and we're going to shut down all of religion in America, in-person religion, for 2 years or more. If you said that 5 years ago, people go, oh my God, what do we do? We can't do anything. And people pivoted on a dime. It wasn't easy. It was complicated. We're still arguing about it. But most people flipped, okay, we're going to have online worship. We're going to have online giving. We're going to start new things because people need food and they need help. We're going to figure this out. And they did it in a split second. It's remarkable. No other people could do this if you shut down all these other things and said, and everyone else did this too. But I think religion itself, which is in person often, changed on a dime. It's remarkable. So I would give you, if you gave me a hand, I'm going to give you all a hand. You are amazing people. And you have a chance to help us grow into this moment to be something more than we are. So with that, let's have a conversation about this. So the first question we have is, what does it look like to gather together now, 2.5 years into COVID? What's changed and what does it look like for you all?
I will share. So 2.5 years into this pandemic, which is still not over yet, I think at the Fountain of Praise, what we have found is people are happy to see one another. People are also still very cautious because we had a lot of loss of life and we held many, many funerals. And so with that time, people still know that there are new things that I must do to protect myself and to protect others. We still encourage people who come to the church to wear a mask, and we have not moved to mask optional because we feel, still along the CDC guidelines that it's still important that people, especially those that are high risk, are being safe. And so I just think part of it has been a big desire for people to gain fellowship once again. I think that was a huge missing part. We provided worship experiences online. We provided ministry outside of Sunday morning services. But seeing one another was a very important part of the lives and the roles of what people do with one another. And so it encouraged them to come back together. So it looks like fellowship once again. It looks like not what happened, what was going on before in terms of numerically, but we're starting to see the numbers come back.
So I was, I'm still a Jewish guy, but I was a Jewish kid growing up in Los Angeles, and like every other Jewish kid in Los Angeles, I wanted to be Steven Spielberg. And I realized that wasn't going to be my path, and I decided to become a rabbi. But I am very much of a media producer. Today, more than I ever imagined I would have been 2.5 years ago. I never go anywhere to lead a service or a funeral or sometimes even a baby naming without the family saying, and could you bring that Zoom set up? And so I've gotten decent at getting it all set up. I'm about 85%, about 15% after services, I see online that people are saying, I can't hear because I forgot to turn something on or off. But your comments, Bob, about the way we moved so quickly, it really is remarkable to me that we learned about the severity of things in April of 2020, and we put on a multi-city, multi-platform High Holy Days that September that was a whole world of technology that I was a film kid in college, and I was editing on 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch film, right? I didn't know anything about digital, right? The learning curve has been steep, but the reach has also been fascinating to see how we can reach beyond just our immediate world.
You know, in the Muslim community is a little bit of a conundrum in that we actually grew during COVID. There's 3 mosques that opened during COVID that I know of in the past 2 years. And since COVID sort of ended, sort of hasn't ended yet, many of the mosques throughout the city, especially the major mosques, have added an additional Friday service because there's so many people coming back to the mosque. Which is really interesting. But one of the exciting things about being in a sort of post-COVID era is that it's focused the program directors of the mosques and the executive directors and the imams and all of us to really reassess the type of programming that we actually need to do. In fact, go much leaner, because prior to COVID, we were doing a lot of programs for the sake of doing programs because we thought these were great programs to do and we just keep churning out programs. But when COVID hit, we realized, because we had to do a forced reassessment, we had to redo all of our strategic plans and realize that a lot of the programs that we did, it was more about the programs that we were doing, focusing on what we were doing instead of why we were doing it, right? And why we're doing it is supposed to be because we're calling to the oneness of God, calling people to God and making sure people have the spiritual enrichment they need to focus on God in their daily lives. So it's exciting in that we've had to repurpose our programming, cut a lot of the fat, but also find innovative ways in connecting with the community.
I remember when COVID hit, I'm the Spanish pastor here for Chapelwood. I got depressed. And I said, man, what are we going to do? Because I'm very pro, I need to see you, I need to be with you, I need to touch you, and went to vacation, and just through time of meditation decided I was going to take a posture of kind of like what Moses did when he was between the Red Sea and the enemy in the back. And he just prayed and said, Lord, what do we do? And the Red Sea opened. And so I kind of took that posture. I said, you know what, we're going to move forward. I don't know how, I don't know what we're going to do. And thankfully, Chapelwood was here to kind of guide me and make sure and hold me back a little bit. But we grew as well during COVID, and we just started we did a few parking lot services. We have a food pantry here that during COVID, we were serving about 400 families a day during COVID, and meeting people from all different walks of life. We went strong online, really invited people we were having people join the church online. And so by the time we got back, we were just, a lot of people wanted to come back. And so we just decided, I think the posture we took is we've got to help people. We've got to serve people. We've got to do something to connect people. We can't just sit back and just let everything die. And I think that was to our benefit. We were able to see some good growth through that.
I can answer. We were told not to answer every question, so I was just kind of, So one thing that it looks like at Covenant, we spent 18 months Zooming and live streaming only, and they were the longest 18 months of my life. So one thing being back looks like is just gratitude. I have so much gratitude. We've been changed in ways we're still coming to realize and are being changed. As you mentioned, it's not like it's over. COVID is still with us. So much grief and loss and just vulnerabilities exposed. They were, of course, there, but, we also had so many things come to light while we were not meeting. You think about the deaths of George Floyd and others, Ahmaud Arbery. It was such a time of just extreme grief and loss and coming to see that the world isn't what we thought it was. And that's, I would say that personally, coming to realize I was born in 1977, that the world I thought I lived in is not the world I live in. And that was painful, but it also inspired me So now back in person, when I see my beloved community and I can pat them on the shoulder and say, how's your aunt? You know, we can have those chats that you just can't have over Zoom. There's a community you just can't, right? There's what happens around the coffee pot that you just can't do over live stream. I'm grateful for live stream, don't get me wrong, but we've come back with thanksgiving and joy and gratitude, even amongst the grief, right? You don't have to pick. It's a both-and situation. So,
You know, even in, we're talking about our congregations, and we're talking about how we connected with our congregations. One of the amazing things that I saw during COVID that we didn't really see prior to COVID was that just the amount of interfaith engagement, especially amongst leadership, especially amongst clergy. We started an imam rabbis thing. We signed a letter the imams and rabbis did, and then the imams and rabbis and pastors got together multiple times, socially distanced, outdoors, talking about how do we address our congregations. There was a lot of knowledge sharing. I remember we did a class on Zoom because we've always been on Zoom before it was cool to be on Zoom. My only regret is not buying into the stock ahead of time. But I remember doing a class for pastors on how to conduct services over Zoom, and it was just the distance brought us together, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to follow up on this. So we're at a time where people are skeptical of organized religion and of worship. So when people say to you, why do I need to worship or be involved in a community? What's your response? What do you say to them?
In the Muslim community, worship is more than just praying 5 times a day. It's obeying the commandments of God and following the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And I find sometimes people just generally, whether it be Muslim or not, put worship in this box, whether it has to be Sunday services or it has to be Shabbat, right? Or it has to be midweek services or morning services or 5 times a day, often forgetting that I believe Moses and Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad have teachings that essentially point to worship. So for instance, the Prophet Muhammad said, even a smile is a form of charity, right? In the Quran, God says, وَأَحْسِنُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and do good. Truly, God loves the doers of good. And that in of itself is a form of worship, right? So one of the beautiful things about COVID that happened, and I find irony in that statement, one of the beautiful things about COVID was that it forced people to think outside of the box that they put God and worship in. And they were forced to eradicate that box, and we all really leaned on it, right? Or stepped on it. And that was just our comfort zone. But that box had to be broken apart and looked at all the beautiful aspects of our faith traditions.
yeah. Well, on worship, go ahead, please.
No, I think it's very interesting that during the midst of COVID, that many organizations and people looked to the church. And so whether individuals who found themselves in faith crises, because crisis does cause you to rethink your faith many times, they found their way back to church or to fellowship or faith in some ways. And even amidst what you've talked about, Bob, with the Pew Research, even back in 2018, they did some research that showed 50% of Americans affiliated with a religious organization. So now the new data shows that number is still declining, but yet and still the crises of a global crisis, of a health crisis, of people dying, literally dying every day, millions of people, cause many to go back to their roots and foundation of faith. And so some churches, some mosques, some synagogues saw growth during that time, but then sadly, I know that there are a lot of others that probably closed during that time.
Right.
But I really do think that at the core of it all, it wasn't just individuals, but organizations looked to faith leaders. We did partnerships, just like you mentioned, with imams and rabbis and pastors of different denominations coming together to talk with Methodist Hospital, to share out vaccine information and to ensure that people were getting quality information. Organizations were looking for, how do we reach the people and who do we go to? And they found that through the faith communities. And so it really, to me, just highlighted and emphasized what we stand for and who we are and why people can trust us.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Laura.
No,
go ahead.
please.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So my family and I, we flooded during Harvey. And I was really in the thick of just all the issues related to Harvey. And I remember listening, I was on a radio, I was on all these different radio stations. I think the idea of a rabbi flooding was very interesting to other people. And I don't know. And, Noah.
I was going to say, it's
flood,
got to be an
and all
arc
that.
thing. We could surely.
Yeah, clearly, yeah, definitely. But I remember I was on the radio. I was about to be on the radio. It was a New Orleans station, and there was an expert on something who said this phrase that just stuck with me. He said, natural disasters don't create crises; they reveal them. And it stuck with me profoundly because if not for, if your religious tradition can't stand up and be there for you in the midst of something like COVID, then I think you have to ask the question, what is the value of it? Now, I'm not saying that it should have just erased certain religious traditions by any means, but absolutely, we had to figure it out because this is when people really needed us, right? This is when people, like, that's sort of like, the proof in the pudding, right? Like, why does it matter? Is it going to matter? And so I don't think, at least I don't experience a drastic reduction in attendance or in worship. Now that we're back, I think that happened many years ago, and all of we religious traditions, we're really in the process of redefining what it is that makes us matter, right? It used to be that people just automatically belonged, right? But that's not the driving force. It's not the zeitgeist of our world, which forces us to then figure out, all right, why does this really matter? And it can't be just about, I can tell you, we Jews, we are not fighting with each other people, trying to prove that they're wrong about their belief. We are too small. We're not centered around belief to begin with. Yeah. We let other people argue those. But the question of why does it matter? Right? I think that's the question we have to answer, less so than what do we have to do to make them come.
Yeah, I agree, and I think worship at its best, right, connects us to mystery, connects us to each other and ourselves, helps us know we're not alone. That's vital. Yeah. You think about those moments during lockdown when you were just at your lowest, right? Having a connection to something beyond ourselves that says you are loved and what you're doing in the world matters, and keep doing it. And I keep thinking about the prophets Isaiah and Amos, who have a lot to say about phony worship, right? They've got lots of quit your play acting, quit your worship charades. The quote we can all do from Amos, let justice roll down like waters, is in a section where the prophet's talking about play acting and worship. Because you know what? It's not worship if the poor are starving and hungry, if racism rages in our country, if we can't find a way to sit at a table with someone and connect, right? So I think it just all swirls together. I agree with everything everyone said, but this way to connect to mystery and to something beyond ourselves, and to have the both and of doing and being held in this love, this divine love that is available to all of us, and then doing justice and loving mercy and walking humbly. Both things. I'm going to get a tattoo of both and. It's going to be.
So there's a kind of an irony here. I was just thinking this. So the book kind of. I have a question. I can't read the card. I'm sorry.
It says, remind everybody that on the tables there are ways you can write a note, a question rather.
Question. Okay.
You could write us a note.
This is why. Now, see. This is why you never let a reporter. He's just gonna ask. Kim is being very nice. So there are cards on your table. If you have a question, write in the card and give it to Kim or Sukri, and they will. I think just give it to Kim. All right, give it to Kim, and she will give them to us. And they're awesome.
While
Yeah.
you're doing that, we decided to call our Sunday gatherings a fiesta. Is that better?
There you go.
Yeah.
Much better.
We decided to call our Sunday gatherings a fiesta. And I agree with our imam here that worship is a lifestyle. Worship is something that we do every day. But we just decided that Sundays was going to be a fiesta. People are sad. People are dealing with pain. People are dealing with all kinds of stuff. We don't need to make the experience of Sunday just another, dry experience. It's got to be lively. And so we kind of look at our Sundays as a celebration of worship, a celebration of our worship to God. And every once in a while we try to stick food in there, and that always increases the attendance.
Are you talking Taco Sunday worship services?
Yes.
Come on.
Yes.
That's no fair.
So I had the best thing. I moved to Nashville, went to a church there that imploded. So religion reporter, I tell the pastor, don't do anything stupid, please, because I have to write about the paper. So then I leave the paper, and he does something stupid, church implodes. But right before COVID, I started going to this little congregation, which is mostly very diverse, but they meet in this place called Plaza Mariachi, which is in this Hispanic neighborhood in Nashville, which has like a food court, and we finished the church service, and the mariachi band starts playing. And all these things. It's the most wonderful thing. We eat, and then COVID hits. I'm just like, this is the worst. I had the best church experience, and then we don't have it. Sorry, I'm interjecting. I'm taking a modern thing.
Something about food,
yeah.
Something about food.
Yeah.
Jesus, before he went to the cross, that's what he did.
And a mariachi band.
And
Oh, it's so great. It's like,
That's in the
finish it.
Gospel
Let's
of Thomas.
If we start having mariachi bands sold out every Friday afternoon,
Yes,
then
there
you
you
know
go.
where they're at. They're at the mosque.
I was saying before the disaster, so I started writing this book after reporting on a disaster. And if you have never been to a disaster site, well, you all know here, you've been in a disaster site, right? It's the most religious thing ever. Everyone shows up, and they all get along, right? The Muslim groups show up, and the atheist groups show up. I was at this group, the atheists showed up, and Samaritan's Purse, Franklin Graham's group, right next to each other. And they're like, hey, didn't we just see you at this other disaster? And they were having a great time, right? They're like, we got to help people. So I finished reporting on this. I come back, I get another report saying the rise of the nuns. And I'm thinking, oh, wait, this is not good, because who runs to help at disaster? And secular people do, but they're not organized in the same way that religious folks are. And we have set up our disaster relief so religious folks play a real important role. And then I think, there are a lot of old people there, and they're not always going to be here. And there aren't a lot of young people coming. And I think, we have a problem here, that something vital is going to be lost, that we all rely on, and if we don't do something different, or if we don't talk about this, then we're going to be unprepared when there's a disaster and no one shows up. Right? You guys the faith groups play such an essential role that you can be taken for granted. And then we see it in this crisis, but we have a panel here, in fact, because I wrote this book because of a disaster. So I thought it was interesting. Maybe it's not. I want to ask you this other question we want to get to, which is basically, we talk a lot about how people disagree in our country. I wonder where are places you see people, especially from different viewpoints, agreeing and working together.
a couple of things that I think people agree on, and one of them is we all experience pain. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what religious background you come from. A divorce is a divorce. Mm-hmm. Cancer is cancer. Sickness is sickness. And it doesn't matter where you are, religiously, pain is pain. And ministry is the healing of human pain. And so I think when you begin to tap into people's pain and you're not afraid of their pain. I remember when I got into ministry and I was 19 years old, and a 40-year-old guy comes and tells me all of the stuff that he's dealing with. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, is this what ministry is all about? And I began to realize that ministry is engaging people in their area of pain. I had a couple today in my office counseling, And one of them is non-Christian, doesn't believe in God, church. The other one is a Christian, believes in church, but they both want to get married. And both of them, dealing with pain. So when you deal with the pain, I think when you serve the pain and you can engage the pain, I think that's a point where you can reach, people from different perspectives. And then the other one I'm going to say is, I just mentioned it, is food. I think people forget that not just the poor need food. Everybody needs a meal. And if I can sit down and have a meal with you, if I could sit down and eat with you, that means acceptance. And we can all put down our guards over some tacos and mariachis.
Yeah, there's just so many similarities between our faith traditions on where we agree. Yeah, what got me started in the work in the interfaith world was a very important gentleman to me, the Reverend Steve Quill of the Lutheran Church. And we went to former Yugoslavia to understand the role faith played in the reconciliation process. And no matter if we talk to Albanians or Macedonians, Bosnians, Croatians, Serbs, it didn't matter what conversation we were having, whether they were war criminals or not. They waged war or they fought for peace for the sake of their children. And they would say those words in every single conversation that we had. We did this for our children. We cared for our children. We wanted a better life for our children. And just talking to a Macedonian Christian and then going across the street and talking to an Albanian Muslim in Skopje, Macedonia, and having them say the same thing, but not to one another, I thought that was a tragedy, right? But that we have that one thing in common, apart from food as well, is just what motivates us sometimes as parents is what we do and how we move for the sake of our children.
Yeah.
A former CNN reporter, Sally Cohen, wrote a book called The Opposite of Hate, which should have been probably a bestseller, but I don't know why it was. Maybe because it's at CNN, half the people in America didn't want to read it. But in her book, she talked about how do we overcome barriers that keep us from seeing the other side of a person. Reverend Mayo talked about the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. And, there's some deep-seated beliefs and hates that people act upon in our nation. But what Sally discovered in her book was, or explained in her book, was part of the brain is triggered by things that you have been indoctrinated with, that we have been indoctrinated with for a long time. But when we find things that are in common, so it goes back to the tacos and the mariachi. When we find things that we have in common, it seems to normalize relationships. She uses it as an example of, I wonder what kind of vegetables this person likes. Do they like broccoli? I like broccoli. And as you find common ground with others, then they become less of being other. They become more human. People become more normal, and you realize that they're more like you. And so when we seek out our lives, and what are the things that we value? What are our values? And whether we're part of the nuns or part of the faithful few and the remnant that will remain, we value, our children. We value our neighborhoods, our communities. We value our finance. We have a lot of values that are also in common, and we really can work together to make those things in our world a very positive experience, a very positive happening. But we need to find commonality and work together.
So I'm going to say, yeah, but.
Okay.
I don't disagree. I think all these things that y'all are talking about are so crucial. But they're not happening. At least they're not happening in as powerful a way as they need to be happening. Right? Social media is, if I have to hear the word algorithm one more time, I don't care. Right? The algorithms are written for the purpose of sales. And unfortunately, the rabbis identified this 2,000 years ago. We have, all of us, we have a Yetzer HaTov, an inclination towards good, and a Yetzer Hara, an inclination towards evil. But not really evil, but just messing things up. Throwing things off the table, right? Messing things up. And we are drawn, our human nature, we are drawn more quickly to that judgment, to that ability to, separate that, right? And I believe it's easier for me as a rabbi to say this than my fellow Abrahamic religious leaders. Because we Jews, to a certain extent, this is going to sound funny, we take God for granted. And let me explain what I mean. We're not caught up on trying to prove God's existence or trying to prove how God is manifest. We have an argument with our kid who says, I don't think I believe in God. And what our tradition says is, great, let's talk about that at services, right? Let's talk about that at temple. Let's talk about what we really need to be doing so much more of is focusing on those belief differences and that reminders of what Amos and Micah and Hosea and Isaiah said, which is God doesn't care how ritually pure you are if people are hungry, right? I mean, that is a crucial piece, and I'm very proud of the work that Shariq and I have done together with other clergy leaders with that in mind, to say, let's cut across the stuff that separates us, right? And the leaders need to be doing that more so than we are.
So
anyway.
Can I follow up on that? Because there's a really interesting thing going on in American culture that's called affective polarization. And it's built off what they call stacked identities and the big sort. So we have sorted ourselves into groups where people think the same, vote the same, make the same consumer choices. I can find out one or two things about you and know a ton of things about you. And the way affective polarization works is not to focus on things we agree about, is to think about the out-group, in-group thing. You're part of the out-group, I don't care. If you might have the same policies that we like, we're not ever gonna work with you because you can get a lot done with algorithms and with these stacked identities by telling people who the enemy is. And I wonder how you as faith leaders deal with, and this comes in your congregation, you say the wrong thing in the sermon, you're gonna hear from somebody. You praise the wrong person, all of a sudden you identify with the other group. And I wonder how you as folks, and all the incentives in public policy and in public conversation and in family conversation and Facebook, all the incentives are to look at the people you don't like and say, oh, I can dismiss you. So I wonder how you as, because you're right, the aspiration of faith is the same and dealing and building a world where everyone can thrive. But the incentives in our culture right now are to build a group where maybe my people can thrive and maybe yours don't. So I wonder how you as faith leaders kind of think through how do you overcome those incentives and help people move forward?
Food.
Okay, all right. So, tacos, mariachis, save the day.
I called the guy one time and says, I really like to meet with you and talk to you about the church. And that conversation lasted probably about 90 seconds. Following week, I said, what am I going to do here? So I called him and says, hey, do you like burgers? He said, absolutely. He says, can we meet for a burger? And that was the beginning of a long relationship. And so I think, I'm sorry to make light of this issue again. I'm sorry to keep bringing this back. And can somebody order some food, please? No.
But curiosity too, right? I feel like one of the goals of faith leaders is to beg ourselves and each other to be curious instead of critical. You know, you had that knee-jerk thought, that knee-jerk impulse. Is that your best self? Is that loving your neighbor? Is that what you're called to? Is that what, in my tradition, is that what the peace-loving rabbi we're trying to emulate would want you to do or think? Maybe not. Let's be curious. And I think, everything you just said, I think the world has decided not to be curious anymore. And it's a real tragedy. So as faith leaders, and that's one of my hopes that we're doing in the world is begging ourselves and each other to just take a step back and be curious. And then, you said it, tragedy. I mean, we've lived through so many, and we know what it is to come together and do what needs to be done. We can be called to our best selves, and people are longing, people are begging, please tell me what to do, right? We see on the TV screen, and we know people are suffering, and we want to help. And when we say, here's how you can help, people do it. Covenant has a community garden, for example, and the neighborhood helps us harvest and plant and et cetera. We don't ask them what they believe. There's no checklist. We say, yeah, you can help us, great. There's a kindergartner and an octogenarian, and they're harvesting today, and you can come join them. Great. And then all that produce goes to the women's shelter. We know how to do this. It's when we refuse to be curious and compassionate. Compassionate. My God, what's happened, right? That's it. That's today's sermon.
That's good.
That's good.
Good. So are there parts of your communities that you think still need to be reinvented for the future that you're thinking about? Parts of your practice or the way you do things that you still need to kind of rethink or reinvent?
Yeah, I think most definitely. Even as the world and the faith community really pivoted and adapted very well during COVID, many churches that weren't online had no cameras. Boy, they got cameras really quick, didn't they? Microphones. It was hard to find all that stuff. Get switchers. It was hard to find some of that stuff. But everyone made some adaptation to be able to reach out and continue to connect with those members of their community. I think we still, as a faith-based organization or as faith-based organizations in general, still are discovering ways. Our message doesn't change, but our methods continue to change. And as long as we are in touch and in tune to what the needs are in our communities, and not just within our congregation, but within our community, what's happening in the world, what's happening around, to be that source of inspiration, but not just religion, because these organizations are not just about religion. They're about people, and they're about living, and they're about helping people to know and understand and live. And unfortunately, the algorithms do exist. And, but when people bring those questions, we should be able to have open and free dialogues and conversations like this. So thank you, and thank you Interfaith Ministries for your existence and for bringing together these types of conversations that are across faith lines. And I hope that we can begin to model, that faith leaders begin to model what we need to see in government, what we need to see in our community, what we need to see all around us in our schools, so that our children will know how to behave better. But unfortunately, we're not there yet.
I was I'm just coming from Austin, almost straight here, and I was there for a hearing for public education and higher ed at the Texas Capitol. And the reason for the hearing today was to identify, solutions to the teacher issue. Teacher issue being there's not enough teachers and they're leaving the profession. How do we retain? How do we attract new talent? And the first speaker, or the first testimony that was given, he said something very interesting. He said they looked at the data statewide, and they looked at Oklahoma, which he called north of Texas. And he said Louisiana and New York and all these other states. They did a survey, and they found out that teachers who are already established 10, 15 years in, salary is not their primary motivator. And because it's not their primary motivator, we have to look at public policy, we have to look at workforce support, and different ways that we can incentivize them to stay or come in. But then he said, if we look at the Gen Zers, the number one motivation is financial, is salary. So we have to increase their salary if we want to retain them. He said we have to look at, and we have to market, and we have to target, and we have to segment these different populations if we want to work on our teacher issue here in Texas. And that's something that I think, as faith communities, we learn very quickly. Going back to what I was saying earlier, is we cut some of the fat, started new programs, but what we started doing was market segmentation and then targeting those markets in specific ways. And that's something that I think that we have to continue to do as faith communities, because we have an issue, all of us, which people are losing trust, whether it be in the faith centers or not coming enough or not being connected. Is just segmenting and then targeting those segments and identifying ways to help them connect.
So congregation Shma Koleinu, my congregation, is a synagogue without walls. We do not own a building. We do not strive to own a building. And first of all, that makes things a lot less expensive, to say the least. But one of the interesting things that happened in the process, we've been around now 9 years. One of the things that I didn't expect that I discovered is that not having a building, now, it has all sorts of complications, all sorts of challenges, but one of the things that it does is it undermines precedent in a powerful way. So, tradition, of course, we say, we've been doing that ever since, well, we Jews say, ever since Mount Sinai, right? That's the version of that song that we've been singing since then. Well, it's like, no, that actually was written in 1995, or whatever it is, right? But the not having a building and moving, we use 3 or 4 different spots. We are able to resist the frozenness that can come from this sense of everything is in the same place it's always been in. As I said, I'm not pretending that that every synagogue or every religious institution should become buildingless by any means. But I think it's really important to pay attention to a project like this because it really challenges the norm. It makes you think about, well, how could we do this differently? Could we really imagine a completely different context? Does God go everywhere we go? Well, the Torah says so, right? The Mishkan, the tabernacle, it was built for portability, right? That was the very essence of it. It would move, right?
I think that we need to engage every opportunity to do ministry in new ways and all that stuff. But I think more than that, we need to re-engage the people that attend our congregations. And we need to discover the gifts and the talents that are sitting in the chairs of our congregation. Because in those chairs are talents. In those chairs are people who could do amazing things. And I think if you put us pastors or leaders, faith leaders, in a position where we always got to be coming up with something new, we've always got to be reinventing something, you're going to wear us out. But if we engage somebody who does something amazingly well, that reshapes a new way to do ministry. That becomes a new pathway to do ministry. Like I was at the mechanic, and he was taking care of my car, and he had a very interesting conversation down the street from our church. And I said, "Man, would you come and share that with us on Sunday?" He was blown away, and came and became a member of our church and started inviting people from his shop to our church. So I think, in the Christian faith, we believe in the priesthood of believers, which means that us pastors and leaders aren't the only ones that are supposed to be doing ministry. We're supposed to equip people that are coming to church to do the work of the ministry.
I think we're at a point to take some questions. And I bet you, and here comes Kim with questions. Oh, these are good questions.
To disappear by just sitting in the back, but we have to get up and do something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't want to split hairs or anything, but I think the way we're using these words is tricky. But if what we're doing is trying to love our neighbor, then that's going to lead us toward compassion.
Yes.
That's going to lead us toward justice, social justice, justice for everybody. That's going to lead us to be anti-racist. That's going to lead us to work on ourselves. And is it exhausting? Yes, absolutely. It is completely exhausting, which is circling back why we need worship. Yeah. It's why we need a place to come and be and just sit and hear whatever music is worshipful for us and eat whatever meal is there for us and rest for a moment and be inspired to go back out there and work for the earth and work for each other and work for a better world.
Somebody asked me one time, they said, "Are you a left winger or a right winger, or do you lean to the left, or do you lean to the right?" And I said, "I'm trying to do my best to lean forward."
I like that.
And then another pastor said, another pastor was asked, "Are you a left wing or right wing?" And he says, "I'm for the whole bird."
Yes. Okay, we have another audience question here. This is a good one, too. How do you talk to the nuns, and what do you think the consequences are of this growing number of younger folks that are nuns?
What do you think the what is?
The consequences of this growing number of younger people that are nuns.
Well, definitely the growing number of nuns are concerning to the faith community because, the existence of church is depending on what the next generation does. If we look, and I just say church meaning all houses of worship, if we look at 2 generations down, if it takes one generation to stop going, the next generation knows nothing of God, nothing of testimony or experience that anybody has had. And so it's really concerning to know that the nuns are growing faster than the faithful people. And so I think what do we say to them is we help relate their experiences. You said something about pain, and I heard a young lady speak earlier today at, it was a voters empowerment seminar, but she was talking about how do we speak to people's pain? How do we recognize that people are experiencing pain? And the earth is full of sorrows. I mean, no matter who you are, cancer or sickness or death, it doesn't escape anybody. And so we speak to people's pain and offer them hope, and we help them to have a vision for what could be better, for that purpose of their life, or how they can overcome and see themselves in a different circumstance or in a different light. And then we give them the tools and the resources to empower themselves. Now, whatever our faith traditions are, we all have tools and resources that we feel will help people in this life and in the next life to overcome, to have things better. And so we continue to speak our truth to them. And I don't know if time is over for people to beat people over the head with the Bible, but, I ran away from that when I was a kid. I was like, no, don't beat me in the head with the Bible. But, I say that, figuratively how, some people are like, this is the way to go. This is the way you must go. And people are really strict with it. But if we meet them where they are, greet them with compassion and love, and help them to know that there is a better future for them, and show them that there are ways without forcing it upon people, I think people who are in need will open their hearts to see.
And thank you, Pastor Mia. And with that, we have reached the end of our time. So I just want to say thank you. What a great panel. Aren't these people great?
Thank you so much, Bob. I'm Martin Kaminsky, the president and CEO of Interfaith Ministries, and I want to thank all of you. How wonderful it is when brothers and sisters can walk together and talk together in harmony. It's been a wonderful evening, Bob. I know your book will add to the conversation, and I invite you all to purchase Bob's book and to let him sign it for you at the end of the evening. We've had a lot of talk about what we share in common, and certainly there's been a lot of talk about the restaurants, the food, how food brings us together. So let me be so bold to say that your program is the check for your restaurant dining tonight, that all you have to do is to focus your camera on the QR code, and it's a chance to not only open more food for thought, food for conversation, but there's also 5,300 seniors that are fed by Meals on Wheels and will benefit from your support. Thank you all for joining us, to Chapelwood for making this beautiful space available. And I now know where door number 7 and door number 10 are. I'm going to go back, Rabbi, even though we don't have a house of worship, I think we need some door numbers for our synagogue here. Such wonderful speakers. I also want to just offer thanks to our organizing committee. I'm sorry that Paula Sutton couldn't be with us, but to Rabbi Scott Hausman-Weiss, to Katie Floyd Wang, to Kim Mabry, who helped organize and really took the leadership in this program tonight. And to her boss, Jody Bernstein, who leads our interfaith relations and community partnerships area. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I know you care. I invite you to stay connected. We are on everything, on Instagram and all the social media, Facebook. And so I encourage you to watch for our programs and continue to be there. Again, thank you for participating with us, for bringing your points of view, your points of heart and mind together for us to think about. Bob, we appreciate you making the trip. We will look forward to reading all of your stuff in the religious news service, and it's great. And so at this point I say, on behalf of our board of directors, led by Charlene Chuang and so many of them that are here tonight. Would you wave your hands, members of the IM board? We thank you for your support and what makes this all possible. I think at this point, I wanted to remind you about the reflection card. It's our way to just sort of get some feedback from you. It's on your table, and please take a moment to just give us your thoughts, and make sure if you're not on our mailing list, feel free to add your email to this card, and we will make sure you know all about us. So with that said, take a look at Reorganized Religion, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Drive home safely.
Friends, Bob's going to be over here at the table selling his book and signing it for you. And if you have questions for him directly, he'll be at the table. Thank you. Drive careful.